delayed to take this so that Professor Ona can round up with you guys in the afternoon. And then hopefully tomorrow, if we don't finish, we'll finish on Friday. What we have to do are things you are familiar with, largely, as I recognize some of you are practitioners, so you know some of the things we'll be talking about. Excuse me. So we wouldn't be saying things that you are not familiar with. It's just so that we'll put it on record that to reassure ourselves that what we know correctly, and pick up some new knowledge here and there to sharpen our understanding of our environment and issues in environmental sustainability. As you are aware, the course ENS 801, titled Practical Issues in Environmental Sustainability, has two of us taking you, Professor Ona and myself, is handled or is handling aspects that do more with policy and, if you like, philosophies that are underlining our environmental sustainability talk and our work in the environment. We'll be looking at some of the things, there will be repetitions here and there, but by and large, I'll be taking you through another aspect. If at any point you feel like asking a question, you can stop me and continue from there. So I would like to introduce the course in this manner, that this course is situated in the World Bank's Environmental and Social Framework, ESF. I'll pause here to ask, and how do I minimize it? I'll ask how many of us are familiar with the Environmental and Social Framework of the World Bank? Let me pause the... Okay, Abba, you want to say something? Yeah, you can unmute and speak. I'm trying to... So how many of us are familiar with the ESF? I'm going to go to the gallery and let's see, by show of hands, how many of us are familiar with the ESF? You know how to raise, one person has raised this one hand, two. Who else? So just two people are familiar with the ESF. That's okay. I asked that because I want us to, I was going to say, at the end of today, perhaps, you can take the evening and search the World Bank site and look for there's a course, a basic course on environmental and social framework. You'll get a certificate after you've gone through it. It's quite a simple thing, but then it will sharpen your understanding of what we are doing. The entire courses you'll be taking The environmental and social framework was approved by the board of the World Bank way back in 2016. And it consists of a vision for sustainable development. This is in consonance with the Sustainable Development Goals, but not a substitute for it, for them rather. It has 10 environmental and social standards, which by now I believe many of you have become familiar with. These are the requirements that the World Bank sets for borrowers. If you are looking for money from World Bank to execute a project, you need to comply with these environmental and social standards. It provides for an environmental and social policy for investment project financing, which sets out the requirements that apply to the World Bank. And the other components of the document, the Environmental and Social Directive and Procedure for Investment Project Financing, and a directive on addressing risks and impacts on disadvantaged and vulnerable individuals or groups in development. You probably would have touched on some of these in your previous lectures, one way or the other. The World Bank having this focus that in development, we shouldn't have the collateral damage of people suffering, particularly disadvantaged and vulnerable individuals or groups. There should also be no collateral damage by way of environmental degradation and so on and so forth. And these ESSs apply to all investment project financing projects initiated on or after October 1, 2018. Before then, the World Bank had what they call the environmental and social policies, okay? But these have been refined into ESS and they guide what the World Bank does. I need to give you this background because the whole essence of this training is predicated on the World Bank's support to us to train people in this area so that we will generate professionals who will work in both the environment, procurement, and social standards fields to guarantee that while we are developing, we do not suffer the collateral damages that I mentioned earlier on. Okay. So the ESF supports green, resilient, and inclusive development by strengthening protections for people and the environment, like I said earlier, and making important advances in areas such as environmental protection and conservation, labor relations, inclusion and non-discrimination, gender, climate change, biodiversity, community health and safety, development, and stakeholder engagement. You would have touched some of these things in your previous lectures, I believe. I was only privileged to take a moment and attend one just to hear what you were learning so that we don't go repeating so many things. Now, the ESF uses a risk-based and proportionate approach that applies increased oversight and resources to complex projects and allows for greater responsiveness to changes in project circumstances through adaptive risk management and stakeholder engagement. The overarching aim is to promote an integrated approach to environmental and social risk management in development. You keep hearing me saying in development, because much of those of us in the developing world, we are still struggling to build infrastructure and systems so that life could be better for our citizens. So oftentimes we're required to take loan support from the World Bank to execute projects that we consider important to our communities. But like I said, over the years, through experience, World Bank realized that It's not just about giving money to governments to do, in quotes, development projects. It's also important to monitor what they do in those projects so that we don't suffer collateral damage in terms of environmental degradation, social dislocation, and in the bid to fight poverty, you end up creating more poverty. Okay. So the ESF places emphasis on strengthening national environmental and social management systems, which is what our institute is also trying to do on this specific project, so that you build a capacity that will facilitate better how projects are executed. And one underpinning philosophy is transparency and stakeholder engagement. And this is supposed to be achieved through timely information disclosure to the affected communities, meaningful and ongoing consultations throughout the project life cycle, so that once you detect any thing that is going wrong, you are able to sort it out and stop it in good time. Of course, you would have learned about grievance redress systems and all of that. Now, back to ENS 801 itself. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So for ENS 801, it says practical issues in global environmental problems, as it were. Now, the aim of this course is just to bring into focus the various global environmental issues, and we'll try to bring how relevant they are to us here in Nigeria. So things like resource efficiency, which you probably have touched already, we shall look at it again. Issues of environmental pollution, its prevention, control, and management. The management of waste, both hazardous and non-hazardous. And very importantly for us, particularly in the North Central, pesticide use and disposal. You know that every farmer now prefers the use of herbicides here and there, and we know what challenges that comes with. These are some of the things we need to look at. So we shall also be looking at the cause and effect of each global environmental issue as much as possible. We'll be looking at the issue of sustainable community health and safety in development. Look at the potential strategies to address some of these issues. Okay. I hope we are together so far. Let it not be that I'm speaking to myself. Can I hear a voice say that you are hearing me? Hello?
So we are together. We can hear you.
Okay, that's fine. Now, some of the major issues of global environmental significance, you know them one way or the other, because of the adverse impacts on the physical environment. There are disruptions of the ecosystems, the health impact on humans and other animals. I'm sure all of us in this class have heard so much or know quite a bit about greenhouse gas emissions, global warming, climate change, ozone layer depletion, acid rain, hazardous materials and waste, including transboundary movement of uh, toxic waste. Many of you would have heard of the cocoa toxic waste dump in Cocoa Village in the then Benel state. Now I think it's in Edo, which gave rise to creating FEPA and having a specific ministry to deal with the environment. Issues of biodiversity, oil and gas pollution, oil spills, which you are familiar with, because we are suffering this in the Niger Delta area. Desertification here in Nigeria too. Up north, we know that this is a challenge, but on average, generally across the country, land and soil degradation is an issue. In the southeast of Nigeria, we are familiar with gully erosion and so on and so forth. Of course, deforestation, it's now all across the country. While we thought deforestation was responsible for desert encroachment in the north, we find that fuel wood is so common that all across Nigeria, everybody is felling trees to get fuel wood or even make charcoal for cooking or house use here and there. So it is a major issue even here in Nigeria. I put nuclear pollution in red. It's a global issue of concern, but for us in Nigeria, for now, we may think this is far from us, but it's something we need to pay attention to as well. Other issues that are emerging or have emerged and are taking root are issues of plastic and microplastic pollution, both in the terrestrial and in the aquatic environment. Of course, the issue of municipal waste disposal, there is not a Nigerian city that will enter and not be greeted by um, solid waste heaps everywhere, and it's getting out of control now. Yeah, overpopulation is also an issue. We've talked about pollution, but this keeps happening, and it is something that will continue to happen. And especially dealing with chemical pollution, there's very little that is going on to check this, but it's good for us to pay attention to this. And we'll look at them in the context of our Nigerian situation as well. So let's look at resource efficiency, pollution prevention and management. Take it like that. The focus here is to look at sustainable, when we're talking about resource efficiency, we're looking at sustainable use of resources, including energy, water, raw materials. I'm sure in this class, there's no gainsaying that. I want to believe that everyone in this class now knows what we mean by sustainable development and what it means to say we are doing things in a sustainable manner. You want to use things today for our own purpose, but also in a manner that future generations are also able to meet their own needs, so that what we do today does not compromise tomorrow, as per the Brownland report. I believe you are familiar with this. If not before now, at least in your last couple of lectures, you would have learned about that. We also look at avoiding or minimizing adverse impacts on human health and environment by avoiding or minimizing pollution from project activities. And this includes avoiding or minimizing adverse impacts that come from resource use. For example, mining, uh, crude oil extraction, and so on and so forth. Okay. Also, we look at avoiding or minimizing project-related emissions of short and long-lived climate pollutants, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen or oxides of nitrogen, in some cases, hydrogen sulfide, as the case may be, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the things we need to pay attention to. And of note is to look at reducing the generation of hazardous waste, but also to look at reducing the generation of non-hazardous waste. Because on average, in every community, non-hazardous waste are the most common. But when you get to industrial areas or cities, even here in Nigeria, then hazardous substances or hazard waste containing hazardous substances become an issue. And these are things we need to look at. And we shall also be looking at managing the risk and impact associated with pesticide use. I told you earlier that in our own North Central region here, this has become very, very crucial. So what do we mean by resource efficiency? Simply put, it's creating more economic value with less input of resources. It should be a case of the less you look, the more you see, in a way. So when we are talking about resources, we are talking about the use of energy, water, air, land, soil, and ecosystem services. And if we're talking about sustainability, we're thinking of tomorrow. What that means is that what we are doing today for ourselves, there should be less input of resources to satisfy us, knowing that tomorrow people will still need the same resources to meet their own needs. Remember, I mentioned the issue of overpopulation as one of the global challenges we are facing. I mean, many countries have made attempts in the past to reduce their population. Here in Nigeria, we've done it perfunctorily, but by and large, we know that our population keeps growing. And so if we deplete everything now, then tomorrow it will be more difficult for our children and our children's children to live their lives. And that will sow the seed of conflict as people today look at these farmer header clashes as a fight for resources and all of that. So we begin to see some of these consequences, and these are based on the choices we have been making. So here, when we talk about resource efficiency, we're saying we should get good economic value with less input of resources. Now, the resource efficiency stands for the relationship between natural raw materials or technical economic materials and the benefits gained from their use, whether in production or consumption. I put in different words. We develop new technologies to help us extract more from nature. We extract from nature, we develop new technologies to process what we extract more efficiently. But the question is, at what expense? You will notice that globally, and this is an example now, globally, the use of incandescent light bulbs has decreased. We are using LEDs all over the place now. All these energy saving bulbs that we're making use of. It's one way of trying to be more resource efficient in what we do. Now, married to this is resource conservation. Here, this means safeguarding our important resources such as minerals, wildlife, trees, water, and other natural resources, which I believe many of you will agree we are not doing enough at this point, and it portends trouble for us tomorrow. Resource conservation involves judicious use of resources, like we said earlier, to avoid waste and to allow the environment to recover itself. You know that when our population was smaller, our peasant farmers practiced shifting cultivation. If you recall the logic of shifting cultivation, is you farm here, next time you farm in a different place, you leave where you farmed earlier to recover. So that you go around several cycles before you come back to the first place you ever farmed. But because of increasing population, farming, shifting cultivation has largely given way to repeated land use for the same purposes, and which is leading to land degradation. I'm sure if amongst us here we have soil scientists, agronomists, they can testify to this. Okay. So resource conservation is about changing individual behavior in the direction of saving resources. I think I was in the lecture, one of the lectures with Professor Ona, and some of these issues came on board about our own individual participation in ensuring sustainability of this our environment. So conservation will require individual behavioral changes to save resources. We shall talk about this again at some point. So the goal of resource conservation isn't to achieve the same result using a different energy efficient technology, but also it's not only to achieve the same result using a different energy saving technology, but to also, I think I'll correct this, to make sure that tomorrow next generations are also able to achieve their own goals. So it is also to avoid waste, so that we use resources only when we need them. We take on what is useful and not be extravagant because we have so much. What you think is so much today, suddenly you discover is so little by the time you get to tomorrow, if we don't take the steps to make that difference now. So some of the changes in attitude for resource conservation would include things like turning off lights when leaving the room. If you go to any establishment in Nigeria today, in broad daylight, you see what we usually call security lights. All through the day, they are on. I know that we are suffering this on our university campus there as well. People will not think of turning off the lights when they are leaving the room, when in actual fact, you need the light when you are in the room. When you are leaving the room, if it's in darkness, it doesn't matter. For those who are affluent, instead of drying their clothes, they use electric dryers. But of course, that means you are taking on more energy. At the end of the day, when that dryer fails, becomes unserviceable, it creates adds to the pool of electrical and electronic waste materials that we are battling with. Okay. Sometimes cooking using burners of the right size, small for small pots and large for large pots, is important. Find that these are small things that people don't take as important. You are using a gas cooker that has a broad burner, and you come and put a small pot there. Much of what you are burning goes to waste because the little pot can only take so much at a time. So it's usually very, very important to take these things into cognizance. And that's why we're saying that the change of attitude is important. Little by little, coming from each community member, it will aggregate to something very, very useful. Now, let's take on the issue of pollution. Again, this is what we're all in this class, I believe, we're familiar with. Let me pause here. I can see some comments, just in case I need to answer some questions. Somebody else is busy who is observing the formation of a multiple rainbow and sun reflection up in the sky. This person is not paying attention to the lecture. As in George, somebody says he has noticed one around here in Makodi. I guess it's something. Okay, somebody says we need to adjust the screen. Is it not showing? For me, it's so big, I was even thinking that I should have reduced the font. If this is coming from, sorry, it's coming from who? Yeah, do we have a problem with the size of the screen? It's clear. Very okay. It's all right. Thank you. Now, when we talk about pollution, usually we talk in the context of environmental media. We talk in the context of environmental media. So if we find substances in water, soil, or air that degrade the natural quality of these media, then we consider the medium, depending on the extent, contaminated or polluted. Now, there is usually this distinction that is made between contamination and pollution. Contamination referring more to just a change in the quality by the presence of foreign material in the medium without adverse deleterious effects on humans and other animals. It can get to the level we can regard as pollution when the impact of their presence becomes detrimental to our normal life. Then we'll start talking about pollution. In another context, we look at pollution as the presence or introduction of a substance into environmental media, which has harmful or poisonous effects to humans. And this is the one that probably refers to what I was saying, that the distinction between contamination and pollution. Now, in this context, we are looking at air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, noise pollution, and radioactive pollution. The ones that are very obvious to us in our Nigerian setting are air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, and also noise pollution, which has become very, very significant in nearly every Nigerian city. Noise pollution. Um, I want to believe that some of you will be doing your thesis on noise pollution so that we can generate more data on this. Now, if you take a look at this picture, can a few of you just comment on what you can see? You can unmute and speak up. Hello?
Yes, sir. We can see a refinery. There is smoke coming out, and there is a lot of garbage around. Around.
Okay. Not necessarily a refinery, but emissions from a point source. Looks more like smoke. It
Yes.
could be an incinerating facility, or it could be any other facility that go ahead, that issues issuing emissions into the atmosphere. Yes, go ahead. How can you judge? You want to say something? Go ahead. George was 5 hands, and yet just unmute and speak. But if you are satisfied with our guy's observation, we'll just move on. So you can see it is unsightly.
Hello,
And
sir.
obviously, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sir. Sir, I can see there is a environmental serious adverse effect on the environment, on the soil, in the air, emissions from the tunnels that are around the environment. There is a garbages, slum in the environment. That's what I can see. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Now, what you are saying is that when we talk about pollution, this is a kind of image that will come to the mind. So that when
Hello.
okay, Tachia, go ahead.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, class. I can clearly see the types of pollution, air pollution by way of emission into the atmosphere, and a clear example of soil pollution.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, so, okay, Samuel, you want to say? Yeah, like I was saying, when we talk about pollution, yeah, Julius, want to say something?
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Yeah.
So I can see just like you've said, the environment is polluted in all its media or medium. I can see the air being polluted by the incinerating facility, and then I can see the soil or the land is being polluted with all sorts of rubbish and all those garbages that are there. You have some plastic bags and all that. Then this can also lead to groundwater aquifers contamination. That is, even the water, groundwater around this area is not safe because of there will be direct sinking of this contaminant into the water. And then you can see that the plants are not even well to do. The soil color has changed, and so many whole lots of pollution here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Very good. So when we talk about pollution, this is a kind of image. This when you share a thing like this is what comes to our mind: pollution. And like Julius just said, apart from the emissions into the atmosphere, the mess, let me use that word, you find here, has implications on the groundwater there in the area, has implications on the vegetation. And if there's a stream close by, you can think of when it rains, runoff from this can sweep into the stream or river, as the case may be. And so from just what we have here, there will be a spread of what starts here as just in this area, it begins to spread to other areas. Here, we may say pollution, but with time, from the leaching, the runoff, and these emissions, media that are far away from this location can become contaminated. If this is not checked, they too can eventually become polluted. So what do we need to do? I want us to now look at pollution prevention and its management in development. So we'll learn some few terminologies as we go on. Why do we want to prevent pollution? And the answer is quite simple. There is a need to address potential adverse impacts on human health and the physical environment. And this we can do in the course of project implementation. We have brought in the project implementation angle because, as I told you at the beginning, in the context of the World Bank ESF, sometimes, if not done properly, a development project will become a source for pollution, can become a source for contamination. And as we shall see as we go along little by little. So for effective prevention and management, there is need to first to check the existing ambient conditions, what we usually call baseline data collection, like you do in AIA or ESIA. These are terms I believe you are familiar with by now. You also look at areas that are already impacted by pollution. Do you need to clean up an area before you site the project? If you are going to clean up the area, what are you going to do with what you are cleaning up? What you are taking from the site of your project? Will you just be relocating the pollution from one area to another? These are things to consider. You look at the assimilative capacity of the environment, which is what we'll define in a short while. You look at the existing and future land use. For example, for those of you who are from Benue, you probably would have heard that they are building a bridge across River Kasinala at the Buruku crossing point. Now, I believe that project would have considered so many issues that have to do not just with the environment, but with the social setup in the area. So you look at how the land in that area is being used now, and after the bridge is constructed, how will the land be used? That is one example. You can find so many other examples. So you consider all these things because to fight, if I may use that word, pollution, we have to start from the beginning. If you are going to locate a project in an area, what is the prospect of that project generating polluting materials, contaminating materials? How would that be handled? Which as we go along, this will keep recurring in our thoughts. We also look at the project's proximity to areas of importance to biodiversity. Will your project change the biodiversity profile where you are locating it? You have to consider that. And if it's going to change, will it be because of pollution or some other aspect? For example, land clearing and other activities. If it's land clearing, you clear the land, what will you do with what you have cleared? Will that become polluting agent? You look at the potential for cumulative impacts with uncertain and irreversible consequences of your projects entirely. Okay, and of course, today everything we do, especially as pertains to the environment, we look at the potential for impacting climate change. Now, I talked about assimilative capacity of an environment, and this refers to the capacity for that environment to absorb an incremental load of pollutants while remaining below a threshold of unacceptable risk to human health and the environment. See, I told you about the difference between contamination and pollution. Now, is it a water body? Is it soil? There may be, because let's face it, there are natural occurrences that can contaminate environmental media. But in the run of nature, these natural contaminating activities can be assimilated by the environment or the medium with time without posing a risk to human health. So if the contamination or pollution is coming from anthropogenic activities, that's the human activities, then what is the assimilative capacity of the medium you are impacting? Can the water body handle the pollutants you are inputting into it? Can the soil where you are dumping whatever waste you are dumping cope with it without posing a risk to human health and the rest of the environment? Then you have to assess and be sure that it can be contained. Now, the assimilative capacity of receiving water bodies, as I just mentioned, will depend on numerous factors. For example, the total volume of water, the flow and flushing rates, the temperature of the discharge that is received, and what is coming to my mind for those of us who are in Makurdi in Benue State, you know the River Benue, and you know where the it's no longer new now. The bioethanol plant is located. At some point, their discharge was impacting the River Benue so significantly that Nostria had to go and seal the facility down for some time. Now, but if what they are discharging into the river is what the river can cope with without anybody noticing, nobody would even bother with that. But naturally, like I said, if the cumulative input makes it impossible for the river to accommodate what is coming in, then naturally we need to do something to stop the loading that is coming from that point source. Okay. Similarly, the assimilative capacity of soil may depend on the characteristics of both the received discharge and the soil itself, as well as the type of microbial, chemical, and physical reaction that take place in the soil layer that is receiving. And this also has to do with climatic conditions as well. Now, for some chemicals, if the soil has high level of organic matter that can hold the chemical, then even if we input, there's very limited danger to underground water, even though there may be a risk to runoff that can wash off from the top soil into a stream or a river nearby. But by and large, if the soil can cope with your input without posing a risk to human health, then we'll say the soil is resilient enough and can receive that. But it is not always the case. Usually, it is not so. I think this is the segment I would like to take, and then we'll try and close for the day, for the morning session, that is. Now, types of pollution and their prevention and management. We will look at air pollution, We will look at hazardous and non-hazardous waste. We'll look at how we should manage chemicals and other hazardous materials. And then, of course, we'll be talking about pesticides, as I said earlier. This is very important to us. Why pesticides could qualify simply as chemicals. We pay special attention to pesticides because of what we know of them in the environment, their impact on the environment, on the general note. Okay. So let's look at air pollution. This refers to the release of air pollutants, often associated with the combustion of fossil fuels generally, such as oxides of nitrogen, oxides of sulfur, but particularly sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, as well as other contaminants, including greenhouse gases. When we look back at this photo, we are looking at this aspect, okay, where we discharge pollutants into the atmosphere. But also, surprisingly, when we talk about greenhouse gases, if we have materials that will decompose here on this land and generate gases like methane, generate gases like carbon dioxide, generate gases like hydrogen sulfide, then what may not look as heavy as this will also enter the atmosphere and pollute the air. But here, when you look at thick smoke like this, you can be sure that you also have particulate matter. Sometimes it is not smoke, but dust from a cement factory, for instance. You find that you can send a thick issue of fine particles into the atmosphere, and will constitute particulate pollution of the environment. Okay. Now we need to take care of this. And how do we do this? The options for reducing or preventing air pollution may include a combination of approaches. And I want you to take note of this. We are not going to take these in details, but because this is a master's class, I expect that for those who are really, really interested, you will pick from this lecture and then trace further to know more about what we're talking about here. Trace more to learn more so that you will get more information and more knowledge as it were. Now, if you pick an industry like a cement manufacturing plant, you can learn about their processes for checking how much cement dust they pump into the atmosphere, for checking how they control other emissions. Sometimes this will come from process modification, the type of fuels they use, and even the materials they begin their processes with. Okay. Then there are also other technological devices that are used to control emissions, like electrostatic emission control systems. Those are things that you can pick up on your own and learn a little more. Now, of particular importance is greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gas emissions, and I want to believe that you know this already. That is why I don't have any slide here describing or discussing global warming and greenhouse effect, because I take it that at this level, you're already familiar with these two things, and of course, climate change. Okay? Now, options for reducing greenhouse gas emissions in project development, for example, will include changing your project location. This may sound a bit strange, but if you are going to locate a project where you need to do massive land clearing that could lead to burning of the vegetation you have cleared as a means of disposal, then naturally you shouldn't do that. In the industry, you can adopt renewable or low carbon energy sources. You can find alternative to refrigerants so that you don't use refrigerants with high global warming potential. Remember, again, I'm taking it for granted that you are familiar with this. If I'm wrong, you will let me know. And that is why there are certain refrigerants that were banned. You are familiar with their chlorofluorocarbons because of their global warming potential, things like that. Okay. You adopt more sustainable agricultural practices, forestry practices, and livestock management practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. You also adopt process procedures that reduce fugitive emissions and that require gas flaring. You know that here in Nigeria, one of our big challenges in our oil industry is we're still doing gas flaring as a means of getting rid of excess gas from oil wells and all of that, which is not good, but we're still doing it because for now, there's the reinjection technology is only catching on, I believe. So maybe eventually gas flaring will disappear. Of course, you think of carbon sequestration and storage. You think of alternative transport systems that require less use of fossil fuels. And naturally, you adopt waste management practices that will not lead to emission of greenhouse gases in the first place, or at least minimize what will be emitted. For many industries, there is need for them to develop air pollution management plans targeted at greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, and this requires that they develop an effective monitoring plan, which includes defining the greenhouse gas emission source, the processes and schedules for collecting emission data, so that if regulatory agencies show up, they are able to provide information that this is how we are doing business sustainably by controlling greenhouse gas emissions. This is our source. This is how we control it. These are the processes we use. And this is how much data we keep collecting to monitor what we are doing, so that they don't fall foul of regulatory authorities. The monitoring plan itself is a record-keeping requirement only if the facility exceeds a certain threshold. So it's not every industry that is required to do that, but those that are required to do it must do it and have it handy so that when regulatory authorities show up, they are able to make it available. So if you want to set up a successful monitoring plan, these are some of the steps that are important. Like I said earlier, first and foremost, your greenhouse emission sources, gas emission sources. How are you monitoring them? Who and how is the person collecting the data? When the data is collected, how is it processed? So that you are not just collecting numbers, but you're collecting quality data that can stand up to regulatory inspection. It is important that every big industry adopts this in this new era of environmental sustainability that everybody is talking about. So a typical monitoring plan will include a source identification, like we said. We will describe exactly what you are doing, where the gases are coming from. And your data collection process, calculation, and data maintenance procedures should be clear and understandable by any specialist or expert in the area to be able to pass judgment on you in a fair and just manner. Okay. I mentioned this earlier, so I don't want to repeat it. Your data that you collect should also be reported and deposited with the designated regulatory authority. In Nigeria, we have NSREA, we have Federal Ministry of Environment. Excuse me. Of course, depending on your industry, you may have other regulators that may wish to have access to that. I want to stop at that. I can get ready to take off. We will continue tomorrow morning with managing hazardous waste and non-hazardous waste. I will stop here now and take questions from anyone. Zugu Desinengi. Zugu Desinengi. My battery is running low. Shit.
Okay. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Thank you so much for the lecture. We appreciate it, and it was explanatory. My question is regarding alternative energy source in trying to manage environmental challenges that we are having. My issue is my own is regarding, because if you see, the world is actually moving towards electric and alternative energy. But Nigeria here will depend largely on fossil fuels, and it seems though the discussion is going on, it's not really been robust. How do we then position the mindsets of people as environmental conservatives towards having a robust discussion about this topic, that so that Nigeria can also get to a place where we evolve into, electric cars and all of, so that the world doesn't move and leave us behind. We so much engrossed with oil, and it is becoming an issue. That's why I don't know if you can throw more light on ways we can position more, and ways which we can help in shifting the mindsets of people regarding um, alternative sources of energy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Zugu. Your question, which is also a common, seems to have the answers inbuilt in what you're asking. One, you say it's an ongoing conversation. You also alluded that the awareness is not much. And so we need to do more, which is partly what we are doing here. And that is how come part of why this specific project is important. Part of why this program that you have enrolled in is on the table, so that more people get to know, with technical knowledge available and evidence available as to why we should do things differently, then people can also begin to do things differently. But speaking more broadly, and that's why we need people like you to become what's the word? Environmental conservation diplomats, so that you get our policymakers to begin to see these things for what they are in reality, so that nobody thinks this is put it in a Nigerian palace, an Oibo type of thing. I'm sure in your other lectures with Professor Ona, we would have talked about the deniers of this movement, those who are skeptical about some of the things you as environmentalists will be talking about. So we need for people to begin to believe, and the belief should come from evidence, which we convince individuals, organizations, and policymakers as to why we should move away from the use of fossil fuels, for example. I know that solar power is becoming popular in Nigeria, not necessarily because people want to protect the environment, but they find that as a surer source of power. Am I right or wrong? They see it more as a surer source of power, not necessarily, but eventually, even if that is their reason, it will help. So yes, we need more awareness, but we also need more evidence. And that is why your studying on this program is important. The research you will do will be important, because when you build this database that shows clearly why we must change our way of doing things, how we use energy, and the type of energy that we should pay attention to, then I think eventually, like you say, the world will not leave us behind. But if there's any other person in the class who wants to comment on what you said, they are free to do so. Shinshima, you can go ahead. Shinshima Michael. You can unmute yourself. The host unmute. I can see other hands raised up. Can you unmute and speak? Are we together at all?
Okay.
Yeah, so
Good
Shinshima
morning, Prof.
Michael. Good morning,
Okay.
please. Go ahead.
Okay, sir, can hear you now. Thank you so much, sir. Okay,
Go
sir.
ahead.
My question is it possible for an individual or as a community to have access to those data regarding about the pollution of the air? Because if it's during the industry that are having those data, as an individual, we cannot know the level of the damage that are being caused in our community. But if we can have access to, we can also analyze to know that, and these are the level of the damage that is being caused in our environment. So is it possible for an individual or community to also have access to such data?
Well, we have regulatory authorities that have, by law, the responsibility to do that. So when you say individuals to have access to the data, what expertise has the individual or have the individuals to analyze or interpret the data to take a decision? That is a danger that lies in saying everybody should have access to that. It is why if you say, I told you that data collected should also be reported and deposited with a designated regulatory authority. So it's not just anybody. And the reason is so that you don't create confusion. People beginning to harass companies based on frivolous understanding of what is going on. And it is why I said earlier that the data handling process must be one that is error-free as much as possible and be such that and I remember I said experts or people in the field are able to interpret it. It's not just for anybody. So it depends on what the law says. Have I attempted an answer to you? Because in trying to do this, you don't want to create confusion so that people get up and start creating problems every day, everywhere, based on half knowledge. Any other question? Well, if there is no other question, we'll continue tomorrow morning and afternoon. I believe by afternoon we'll probably would finish.
Edwin Samuel.
Okay, Kavnen. Go ahead.
Edwin, you can go ahead and speak.
All right. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, please.
The question I want to ask is basically regarding the use of solar panels. Like, for example, in Uniagri, there's a solar plant there, and I want to actually know the adverse effects of the solar panel to the university environment.
The advanced effect of solar panels. Is there anybody here who has knowledge of that to answer that question? Because there is an anecdotal story about solar panels somewhere in Asia. Is there anybody in the class who can answer that question? Well, for me, let me say this.
One
Go ahead.
your hand is up.
Yeah, Wange. You know
Good
more
morning,
about
sir.
that.
I think, hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay.
Good morning.
Thank you for the wonderful lectures, Prof. I
Thank
think
you.
solar panels, solar farms generally have almost close to a zero effect on the environment if considering the technology. But if you consider the construction process of installing those solar panels, it
Good.
occupies land. And
Good.
of course, when there is a construction activities to install those panels, you know that there is a level of excavation that will also distort biodiversity in that particular area. Of course, the panels will take off the solar radiation and prevent the top cover vegetation, prevent them from having access to solar radiation. So to an extent, it will affect the vegetation cover that is underneath those panels and among
Yes.
other things. I think that's the only effect I can see. But when you look at it from a technological perspective, when it comes to emission, it's almost zero emission and zero maintenance. So I think that's the only way I can see. So if you look at the solar farm within the university environment, it's just the vegetation cover and some of
And the land use, the reduced land available.
yes, and it
That is why
reduces the
in
land
China,
available.
they are now having floating solar farms on the high seas so that nobody takes land for that purpose. Okay?
So thank you, sir.
But there's this anecdotal story, and the question is very important, and that's why in the other person's hand, the other person I was saying, let's not do things that will become an all-comers game. There was this story about somewhere in Southeast Asia, the community had solar power installed, and soon enough, somebody told them that solar panels have a way of reducing fertility in women. So they should reject the whole thing. Here is a community that had been crying for electric power. They now had solar power, and some person who had very little knowledge went telling them that these solar panels will cause infertility in your women. And they got up and started smashing the solar panels that they don't want it, they don't want it. But where was the evidence that solar panels cause infertility? That's why it's very, very important that when we are discussing things like this, the technical issues should be left to the experts, which we are hoping through your study here tomorrow, you will form the critical mass that Nigeria has been looking for. Thank you. Yes, Maurice?
Maurice, you can unmute.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for the lecture. I think the angle I want to look at on the impact of solar panels is it's most times it's not in the immediate environment where those solar farms are set up, but let's look at the process before those panels and the batteries get to those locations where they are being set up for energy consumption. Now we know that mining of lithium, that is about the major component of batteries. The places with lithium and the process of mining them adversely affects them. And if solar is going to be used on a larger scale globally now, those niches that have lithium in masses that need to be mined will now be affected in order to like supply those panels and the batteries to the other part of the world. I think that's the angle I'm saying it. Thank you.
There's another angle to it. Yeah. It's not where they are installed that matters, but the creation of the manufacture of the cells themselves. That's what you are saying. Oh, that's it. Abida Kavnen. Abida Kavnen, you
You
can go
can
ahead. You
unmute.
can,
Okay, good morning, Prof.
yeah.
Nice hearing from you once more. So mine is I want to make a contribution to Mr. Zugu. He was advocating for a complete shift from the use of fossil fuel, that is our petrol, definitely or most probably because of the impact of combustion to the environment. But then if he's advocating for a total shift, that leads us back to our DPSIR framework. Now, a huge pressure put on a particular resource causes a lot of negative impacts to the society, which is probably the reason why the use of fossil fuel has become a problem to our society presently. So if he's advocating for the use of solars, it will also, the pressure is also going to lead us back to ground zero where we are, because we know there's going to be displacement of biodiversity, social lifestyle, and everything. So I think what we should be looking into as environmental specialists should be a balance, trying to make use of all resources, creating a balance, be it fossil fuel, be it our solar system, be it make use of resources, but create a balance to that will be very, very sustainable. So to me, I think that is our solution to all these things. Thank you.
Thank you. Like you say, it's an ongoing conversation. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, I think by and large, what we're trying to do here is just to sensitize you, and as graduate students, we should be able to. I know that people no longer write features articles in magazines or newspapers because of ICT now. But I believe some of you have your blogs, you are bloggers, and some are on LinkedIn. These are things that should provoke thoughts from you so that you can begin to share thoughts on various social media to create the awareness that we need so that eventually more and more people, even in popular cycles, begin to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about environmental sustainability and the technical evidence that makes it, the scientific evidence that makes us believe what we are saying and why we think it is important. So you all contribute to this. If you don't just take this lecture, take these presentations and end there. It is for you to develop what we have outlined for you to get, as I said earlier, get more information and acquire more knowledge for yourselves. Thank you. So it shouldn't just be that you are preparing yourself to come and write an exam. No. For me, the exam is just by the way. The essence is for us to create this nexus of people who understand the implications of our consumer society and the things we are doing, how they will impact on us today and impact on our tomorrow and for generations that are coming ahead. All right, I will disengage now as I begin to start my journey. We'll continue tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Let's greet Prof.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you,
sir.
sir. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, sir.
Una no greet say ma answer
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Once you ask question,
Thank you, sir.
Richard, can I ask a question? Richard, can I ask a question?
I've been asking if you don't, who has asked the question?
Is it there? I said it before, and I hope it's not smelly.
Thank you, sir.
What is not smelling?
Okay, Richard, you can answer. Richard, you can ask your question. No? Prof, unmute yourself. Richard, you can unmute yourself too.
Yeah, let's just try and round up so that you can take off.
Richard, ask your question.
Okay, sir. Here is my question, sir. And I heard my colleague saying that solar panels has no negative impact on the environment. I want to disagree with him on that very aspect strongly, because if you look at it, invention of solar panels caused land use and habitat destruction, which is very true, because large solar farms may clear vegetation, may distort wildlife, and this can minimize the proper site selection. And
Okay, let me cut you short. Those things were discussed before. Maybe you were not paying attention. Those were the areas that were mentioned as probable. But the question was in situ, where the solar panel is now installed, not before. What is the adverse effect of the solar panel in place now?
Okay.
Somebody, I think 3 other people talked about what you are saying. the processes of establishing the farm. Somebody even dared to talk about the manufacture of the panels themselves, where you need to use lithium that will come from a mine. And so the mine would have been, the place would have been disturbed to get to the ore, to process and do that, okay? So those things were mentioned.
Notice. I know. Maybe I didn't get it, or I couldn't get it right then.
Yes.
Thank you for the clarification, sir.
All right, thank you, Prof. Wish you a safe trip.
Safe journey, sir. See you tomorrow. Or hear you.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen and ladies. We'll
Thank you,
continue
Prof.
tomorrow.
Yes. You have to take care of everything after a class. Is that was still alive?
There's no afternoon class. No afternoon class today. Hello, there's no afternoon class today.
Prof, help us to end the meeting.
So there's no afternoon class today. Somebody should answer me, please.
Sorry, I think they are going to have an afternoon class.
Yes, sir.
Professor
There
Ola
is
told me
class.
he's going to
He's
take you
coming.
in the afternoon.
Yes, he said he's coming.
Okay.
Yes.
He will take you in the afternoon.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Prof, help us to end the class, the meeting. You are the host.
Hello, Mr. Nyo. Yes, I'm there now. One burger too. So, tell Vashami. Okay, I'm going to this in Shumuti manga. Oh, okay.